I'm a shop slob. If there's a horizontal surface to be had, it's probably cluttered. In my defense, half of the walls in my shop are unfinished, making wall storage difficult, but really that's still my fault. So I wanted to make a small dent in my mess with a tool chest. This video shows you how I built one and how you can build one too. The project starts with breaking down the rough sawn 5/4 red maple I got from my local sawyer. Rough lumber can be more cost-effective to build with, but you pay for the savings with labor. After the stock is in smaller and more manageable pieces, I can mill them flat and square. One day I'll have myself a 12-inch joiner, but in the meantime, a planer sled lets me flatten one face of a wide board before flipping it over and planing the other side. Referencing the cut list in my plans, which I'll link to in the description below, I spend a good while laying out my pieces so I can get the best yield and grain match possible. Over the course of the build, my design changed a few times, which is normal, I feel. Originally, I had this funky lip running around the top, but then it hit me that I'm just creating another horizontal surface to put junk on, so I nixed that idea in favor of box joints, which I then kicked to the curb because dovetails. At this point, I could start cutting out individual pieces at the table and miter saw. I made sure to shoot the ends of each cross cut so that my stock was perfectly square. Adding the thickness of a combo square to my marking gauge helps me get a nice proud dovetail, just a hair shy of 1/8 of an inch. I've found that extra long guidelines on the tails can help guide your eye when setting the saw angle. I stack both of the sideboards together so I can cut 2 sets of tails at once. To me, there's something really special about learning to cut dovetails completely by hand. They're a rite of passage for woodworkers, something to cut your teeth on, earn your stripes, other sayings. And Jonathan Katz's Moses' dovetail jig can really speed the learning process up a lot. I'm not affiliated with John, but I do really like his product. Personally, I waited and purchased mine after I was confident I could cut dovetails without a jig, but I have no shame using it when I'm a bit rusty or I want to be certain I won't screw my workpieces up. If you haven't checked his jig out, I highly recommend it. I strop my chisels. I strop my chisels a lot. I found regular stropping keeps me away from the sharpening station for a pretty good while. Just be sure not to round the back of your chisel. $40 points to Gryffindor for every person that correctly comments where the blue tape trick for the pin board comes from. Even being careful, I managed to split one side of the carcass. Since I'm a jar 2/3 full kind of guy, I jumped on the opportunity to add some cherry bow tie keys to fix my screw up. And then almost sliced off the tip of my thumb at the bandsaw, but luckily I remembered what shop safety is at the last minute. If you're ever cutting something with your miter gauge at the table saw and find that the stock is too wide and pushes the miter gauge out, simply turn the miter gauge around. I had a mind-blown moment when I figured this out. Making half mortises and faux tenons can be a challenge, but using a marking gauge and referencing materials instead of measurements makes the process very quick and very accurate. I remove most of the waste for the half mortises with a router. A drill bit shank makes an excellent depth stop setup block. I cleaned up the mortises with chisels, stropping often. I like to mark my joints with Roman numerals on inconspicuous places, like the back of the carcass. They won't disappear with sandpaper or a card scraper like a pencil mark will, and they lend a handmade look that I find really charming. Since my dovetails are proud, meaning I won't be flushing them flat, I lightly bevel and clean up the edges with sandpaper tacked to MDF. I pre-finished the entire carcass before glue up. I've been working with a new finish for about the last 2 months, and I'm really excited to share it with you in a future video. You'll start to see why I like it so much a little later. The last step before glue up is to cut the rabbet for the case back using a router and a straight pattern bit following a simple MDF straight edge. Since everything is pre-finished, glue up is extremely easy and squeeze out wipes off, leaving no trace behind. My favorite way to check for square on a case or a box build is to use a set of squaring sticks. They ensure there's no racking and no measurement error on my part. I cut the faux tenons by hand and shoot the end of each one before cutting again. This way there's a perfectly flat and 90-degree surface to help keep the tenons square to the base. I bevel the edges of the tenons to help get them seated before glue up. The drawers are simple frames glued to plywood bottoms that also act as the slides. Off camera, I milled up some nice contrasting beech for the drawer fronts. At this point in the build, I finessed the fit of each drawer front to give the reveal I wanted, and then trimmed the poplar sides and backs to match. If you're a football fan like I am, you can still get some work done during halftime. Go Hawks. I pre-drilled the holes for the drawer pulls using Jimmy DiResta's method for finding pull hole locations. Drawer assembly is pretty easy. First I glued the frames together, checking for square, and then glued the frame to the drawer bases. Once I was happy with the way the drawers fit and functioned, I finished them. To trim down the faux tenons, I used some super thin plywood to reference my saw off of before beveling with a chisel. See that scratch on the side of the case? This is a prime example of why I'm so enamored by this new finish I've been using and why I'm okay with finishing before assembly now. It's super easy to repair. I'll be doing a full review and reveal of my new favorite finish soon. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel, or if you already are, make sure the bell notification is clicked so you don't miss out on that video. Living near a hipster city has its perks, like having a vintage hardware store nearby. These pulls are from the 19-teens and came from a huge cabinet shop in Portland that went out of business after World War II. All hipster jokes aside, if you're in the Portland area, make sure to stop by Old Portland Hardware. It's a beautiful store. One of the things that makes casework and box building easier is having a simple way to ensure they're square. Check out my next video where I'll show you how I made the squaring sticks I used in this project so you too can easily make perfectly square boxes.